That dog just stole an entire loaf of sourdough right out of my hands and took off like it had a mission from God. It wasn't the first time something like this happened, but it was the first time someone caught it on video. That someone was me, and I wasn't even mad. Not really. I was stunned, sure, but mostly curious. Because this dog, it was fast, too fast to be a typical neighborhood mutt, had done this before. Loaves of bread, bags of buns, sometimes even the ends of roast chickens, if they were left unattended. Our small town of Watson Creek had a mystery thief, and nobody could quite catch it. Until that morning. I was on my usual walk to the bakery, just a couple blocks down from my place. I like to get there early, before the lunch rush crowds the place and the sourdoughs are still warm. Sarah, the owner, always sets aside a few loaves for regulars. I'd just thanked her and stepped out with a paper bag when this blur of fur bolted across the sidewalk, leapt like a gymnast, and snatched the bag clean from my grip. At first, I just stood there like a fool, watching the dog disappear down the alley. I blinked, looked at my empty hands, then burst out laughing. Because if that wasn't the most committed theft I'd ever witnessed, I didn't know what was. And that's when I realized I still had my phone in my other hand, and by dumb luck, I'd been filming the sunrise before stepping into the bakery. The dog had made a guest appearance. I posted the clip later that afternoon. Just 30 seconds of chaos. Within hours, it exploded. Bread bandit strikes again. Local dog has fine taste in carbs. Catch me if you can. Watson Creek's fastest pup. People loved it. Comments flooded in. Some were upset that I'd lost my loaf. Others offered to buy me a new one. Most were just fascinated. A few even shared their own stories. Turns out I wasn't the only one this dog had robbed. He, or she, we didn't even know, had made off with baguettes, muffins, croissants. Always bread, and always without harming a soul. Theories popped up. Maybe the dog had puppies. Maybe it was hoarding food. Maybe it had a hiding place in the woods or under an old shed. I'll admit, I got obsessed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't stop thinking about why. Why steal only bread? Why never eat it on the spot? And most importantly, where was it taking all of it? I started hanging around the bakery more. Sarah let me sit outside with a coffee and pretend to read while I watched the street. A week passed. No sign of the dog. Then another. And just when I was starting to feel like maybe it had moved on, there it was. Early morning. Dew still clinging to the grass. A golden blur loped down the sidewalk like it owned the place. Medium-sized, shaggy, with a torn collar hanging loose around its neck. It wasn't skinny, but it wasn't plump either. Just scrappy. Smart eyes. It trotted right up to a trash bin behind the sandwich shop and stood on its hind legs to sniff the top. I held my breath. Then I saw the dog's head snap toward the back door of the bakery. The door opened. One of Sarah's assistants came out to throw a box into the bin. The dog pounced. Not violently, just fast. It snatched a bag of buns and darted off. I stood. It ran behind the hardware store. I followed. I didn't want to scare it off, so I kept my distance. Around the back of the store, the dog squeezed through a loose chain-link fence. I hesitated, then climbed over it. The other side led into a narrow strip of woods that bordered the town. Not thick, just a patch of old trees and weeds that hadn't been cleared for years. I followed the rustle of leaves and the occasional glimpse of fur. Every so often, I'd catch a paw print in the dirt, then it vanished. That night, I set out a trail cam. Bought one off a guy from church who used it to monitor deer in his backyard. I placed it near the fence, facing into the woods. 2 days later, I retrieved it. What I saw made my jaw drop. The dog had a system. Each morning, just before 7, it slipped through the fence and disappeared into the woods. 20 minutes later, it returned empty-mouthed. Then again, another trip, this time carrying bread. This repeated 3, sometimes 4 times, like clockwork. But where was it going? That weekend, I brought along Tom, a friend who works with animal control. I showed him the footage. He was impressed. Said the dog looked healthy, too smart for its own good. Said it might have been abandoned. Or maybe it escaped. He offered to help me track it. We followed the trail early Sunday morning. Through the fence, into the woods, past a broken picnic bench, over a dried-up creek. Then we saw it, a hollow tree, wide at the base, with a gap just big enough for a dog. Inside, scattered bits of paper and torn blankets, and tucked in the far corner, 2 pairs of blinking eyes. Puppies. I gasped. Tom swore softly. The mother dog had been stealing food for her babies, not hoarding, not being a pest, providing. We didn't touch them, just backed away slowly. Tom nodded and said he'd come back the next day with a humane trap, not to punish, but to help. Said there were foster homes that took in entire litters, that the mother would be treated kindly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those little eyes in the dark. Monday morning, the dog didn't show up. Tuesday, neither. Wednesday, Tom left food by the tree. Still no sign. By Friday, I was losing hope. Then, as if nothing had changed, the dog trotted back into town and swiped another bun. We watched from across the street. Didn't chase. Didn't intervene. Just waited. It made its way to the fence. We followed, through the woods, to the tree. And that's when we realized the puppies were gone. But not in a bad way. In a nearby clearing, half hidden by shrubs, someone had left a makeshift shelter. A plastic doghouse, old towels, a shallow bowl of water, and inside, the puppies curled up together. A note pinned to the doghouse wall. Saw the pups, thought they could use this. We'll leave food. No need to thank. Just hope they stay safe. No name, no contact. Just kindness. We never found out who it was. Maybe another townsperson, maybe someone who saw the video. But the dog kept coming into town for food. Not stealing as often, more like begging politely. Sarah started setting out a small plate just for it. I started calling her Maple. No reason, really. Just felt right. She let me get close eventually. One morning she sat beside me while I sipped my coffee on the bakery steps. I offered her a piece of toast. She took it gently. Tom said the pups could be placed in homes when they were a bit older. Safe and warm for now. And Maple? She stuck around. Maybe she remembered who helped. Or maybe she just liked the bread. Either way, it felt like Watson Creek had a new kind of celebrity. The bread bandit turned town hero. And that was only the beginning. I'll admit, when Maple started showing up regularly at the bakery steps, I felt like we had crossed some invisible threshold. She wasn't just the stray who stole bread anymore. She was part of the town, and even though I knew not to humanize animals too much, it was hard not to feel like she understood something deep about loyalty and trust. She'd still take off toward the woods after each visit, and I'd watch her disappear past the fence, wondering if her pups were still in that makeshift shelter, or if she had found a better place. I started walking the woods more often, just to make sure nothing had been disturbed. The doghouse was still there, food bowls full, water clean. But the pups were getting bigger. I could see them bounding around when they thought no one was watching. And Maple? She watched them too. always from a distance, like a sentinel. By the third week, people in town had started asking about her, not just out of curiosity, but with genuine affection. Sarah had even posted a small chalkboard sign outside the bakery. "Maple gets her own bun. Please don't feed her random snacks. She's got a sensitive tummy." The sign made people chuckle, but it also did its job. Maple stopped getting handouts from strangers and instead sat patiently by the side entrance where Sarah or I would bring her something light. A plain roll, sometimes a few strips of cooked egg. No onions, no seasoning. We were careful. Tom, meanwhile, kept checking in with the local shelters. He said it would only be another couple of weeks before the pups could be moved to temporary homes. They were already eating on their own and showed no signs of fear around humans. All thanks to Maple's care and the quiet acts of kindness from whoever had built that shelter. But of course, nothing stays simple forever. One afternoon, just as I was locking up the little bookstore, I ran 2 blocks from the bakery. I saw a black SUV pull up outside Sarah's. Out came a man and a woman, both dressed in crisp clothes, clean but not local. The man wore a stiff blue jacket with some kind of insignia on the sleeve, and the woman carried a clipboard. That was never a good sign. They spoke to Sarah briefly. I watched from the corner as she crossed her arms, then pointed toward the alley where Maple usually wandered off. The man wrote something down. I locked the door and walked over. "Everything all right?" I asked casually, pretending not to notice the tension in Sarah's jaw. "Depends," she said. "These folks are from County Animal Control. They're following up on reports of a stray." I blinked. "What reports?" The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. "There were 3 calls in the past month about a loose dog stealing food. We're here to verify the situation and assess whether the animal poses a risk." "She's not a risk," I said before I could stop myself. "She's part of the town. She doesn't bite, she doesn't bark, and she's been feeding her puppies." The man tilted his head. "We're not here to take her away unless there's danger. But county policy requires a review if there's a pattern of food theft or public nuisance. We'd like to observe the animal, check for tags, and determine if she's eligible for fostering." "She's already kind of being fostered," Sarah added. "The whole town's watching over her." But policy is policy. They asked where she usually stayed, and we told them about the woods. Tom, who'd just come around the corner, overheard and nodded grimly. He offered to show them the shelter and talk them through the situation. I stayed behind. I didn't want to crowd the scene, but inside, I was uneasy. Maple came to the bakery later that afternoon, unaware of the new attention. She sat by the side door, same as always. I brought out a plain bun and knelt beside her. She sniffed it, took it delicately, and chewed while staring up at me. "What are we going to do with you?" I whispered. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No sightings of the SUV. No visits from the clipboard woman. But Maple was more skittish. She still came to the bakery, but she didn't linger. Just grabbed her food and bolted. Tom said the officers had taken pictures of the pups but hadn't touched anything. They left a note saying they'd return within the week. The anxiety hung over the town like fog. By Saturday, a group of kids started a petition to let Maple stay. It wasn't official, of course, but it made the rounds at the local church and grocery store. Over 100 signatures by Monday. Someone even printed "Protect Maple" stickers. Kids slapped them onto their bikes and backpacks. Adults stuck them on mailboxes and car bumpers. I taped one onto the bookstore window. Then, just before sunrise on Wednesday, I got a call from Tom. "They're back," he said. "The county folks. and they're bringing a live trap." I dressed in a hurry and met them near the fence. The man and woman stood by their SUV, now joined by a third officer. The trap was a humane one, large enough for a medium-sized dog, baited with food. They planned to place it near the bakery that night. Sarah argued. I argued. But they were polite and firm. "If the animal can be fostered legally," the woman said, "then the safest way is to bring her in, scan for microchips, and ensure she's healthy." "She's healthy," I said. "She's fine." "She might be," the man replied, "but we can't take that on faith." The trap was set that evening, a shallow metal crate with soft padding and a spring-release door. Maple didn't come that night, or the next. By the third day, we all started to worry that she'd caught on, that she wouldn't trust us anymore. But on the fourth morning, I opened the bookstore early and saw her. Not in the trap, sitting beside it, watching. I stepped out with my coffee and didn't move closer. She looked at me, then back at the trap. Then, in a move that left me speechless, she padded up to it, sniffed the entrance, and backed away slowly. Not scared, just thoughtful. "She knows," Sarah whispered beside me. She'd come outside without me noticing. Knows it's a trap? Knows it's not for her good. The officers came by that afternoon to check the trap. When they found it empty, the woman sighed and made a note. They returned 2 more times that week. Nothing. Then, Sunday morning, Sarah found the trap triggered. Bread gone, no dog inside. That was Maple's message. She wasn't going to play along. We met as a group that afternoon. Me, Sarah, Tom, a few of the neighbors who had helped with the petition. We sat in the back of the bookstore with cookies and coffee and discussed options. "We could hide the trap," one neighbor said. "Or let the county take her and hope for the best," another murmured. "No," I said. "That dog's been protecting her family. If she's going to go anywhere, it's going to be on her terms." "Then we need a plan," Tom said. "A real one." And that's how Operation Maple Home began. We didn't want to domesticate her forcibly, but we could offer options, make her feel safe, make her want to stay. We cleaned out the old tool shed behind the bakery. Tom brought in bedding and food bowls. Sarah added a space heater for cold mornings. I donated a radio, set to classical music. Nothing loud, just soft sounds. We left the door open. Maple watched us for 3 days. Then on the 4th, she stepped inside. Not all the way, just a few steps. But it was something. The next day, she curled up near the door. By the weekend, she was inside fully, tail wagging when I brought breakfast. The pups were relocated quietly the next week, taken to a vetted foster family who sent regular updates. Maple didn't protest, didn't even follow them, as if she knew they were going somewhere good. She stayed in the shed. And every morning after that, she came out, sat at the bakery steps, and waited for her bun. Her mission was changing. But it wasn't over yet. The first time Maple barked at someone, it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't aggressive or wild. It was short, sharp, and entirely deliberate, like a warning bell. It was a Thursday morning, one of those sleepy ones where the sun rises slow and no one's in a rush. Sarah had just opened the bakery, and I was sitting outside with my coffee, watching the steam curl up from the cup as Maple dozed beside the shed. She hadn't gone into town for her bun yet, but I knew she would. She always had her routine. Then we both heard it, the crunch of gravel, followed by an unfamiliar voice calling out, "Hello? Anyone here?" A tall man in a green jacket and dusty jeans wandered around the corner, squinting at the signs posted on the bakery wall. He looked lost, maybe even a little agitated. Maple stood up instantly, head low, ears pointed, body stiff. He took another step closer, and she barked. It startled me. I hadn't heard her bark before, not once since I started watching her. The sound wasn't loud, but it was firm, protective. The man raised his hands and backed off. "Whoa there, girl," he said. "Didn't mean anything." I got up quickly and stepped between them. "She's just cautious," I said. "You new in town?" He explained he was looking for someone who owed him money, said he thought the guy had taken off and might be hiding out nearby. I didn't get the full story, and I wasn't sure I believed all of it. But I thanked him for moving along and stayed outside until he was out of sight. Maple sat beside me the whole time, eyes never leaving the street. "She's watching over us now," Sarah said later. "Not just her pups." We'd never seen the man again, and from then on, Maple barked just twice more, each time when someone unfamiliar came too close to the shed. Never bit, never chased. Just that same bark. Like a gatekeeper, announcing that this space, this little piece of Watson Creek, had a guardian. Word about Maple kept spreading. Photos of her started popping up on local forums. People asked if she was up for adoption, and we had to gently explain that she wasn't quite ready. She was adjusting to her new life, one day at a time. And she was still feeding someone. See, even after the pups were relocated, Maple kept disappearing into the woods once a day. She didn't bring food anymore, but she carried something. Old cloth, paper scraps, sometimes even bits of plastic. She'd head out, then return hours later, tired but calm. We wondered if there were more animals. Maybe another abandoned dog. Maybe someone else she was caring for. Tom brought up the idea of a second shelter or hidden den. We decided to follow her again, but this time, carefully. No rustling, no heavy boots. Just quiet observation. It took 3 tries. On the 4th, we got lucky. She led us past the old picnic bench, over the dried creek, and through the denser part of the woods. Then she paused, nose to the ground, ears twitching. She took a sharp left into a cluster of pines. And there it was. A rusted-out trailer, half sunken into the earth. Vines grew through the windows. The roof sagged like a tired sigh. But beside it, hidden behind some brush, was a makeshift lean-to covered in tarp and branches. Inside, someone moved. Not an animal. A person. Tom motioned for me to stop, and we crouched in the bushes. Maple walked right up to the lean-to, tail wagging, and dropped the rag she'd been carrying. A hand emerged from the shelter. A man's hand, pale and weathered, and stroked her head. He murmured something we couldn't hear. Tom whispered, "I'll be back. Don't move." I watched for another few minutes, heart thudding. Maple curled up beside the man, content. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. When Tom returned, he had a backpack and a blanket. He stepped out of the brush slowly, hands visible. "Sir," he said gently, "we don't mean harm, just want to talk." The man startled, sat up, reached for something under the tarp. "No need for that," Tom added quickly. "We're local. You've got a friend there." He nodded toward Maple. The man hesitated, then relaxed. He looked tired, bones too sharp under skin, beard untrimmed, eyes red around the edges. Maybe late 40s, maybe older, it was hard to tell. "I'm not hurting anybody," he said. "We know," Tom said, "and we're not here to move you, just to offer help. The man didn't speak for a while. Maple stood and padded over to us, sniffing Tom's leg like she was giving permission. Finally, the man said, "She brought me food. Before I even saw her face, she left a roll outside. Then another. Then she stayed." "She's good at that," I said. He gave a faint smile. "Smart girl." We learned his name was Dean. He'd been a contractor once, then a caretaker. Lost his job 2 years back after an accident damaged his knee. No insurance, no family nearby. He drifted and ended up in Watson Creek last winter, too proud to ask for shelter, too hurt to leave. Maple had found him, just like she found her pups. And she'd kept him alive, one stolen meal at a time. We didn't push. We left food near the lean-to and checked in every few days. Dean slowly warmed up. One afternoon, he met us at the bakery. Maple was at his side, proud and alert. Sarah made him a sandwich. He ate it slowly, hands shaking a little, but his eyes were brighter than they'd been before. The town talked again, this time with more whispers. Some wondered if helping Dean would encourage more people to hide in the woods. Others just asked how they could help. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was an honest one. Maple didn't care about politics. She had a job, and she did it well. We cleared out the old trailer, patched it up with some boards from the hardware store, and made it livable. Barely, but better than tarp walls. Dean moved in willingly. Said it was the first roof he'd had in months. We brought a cot, a lamp, a radio, same station as Maple's shed. He started helping out around town quietly. Fixing things, raking leaves, painting fences. No one asked him to. He just showed up, and Maple followed. One morning I found them both on the church steps. Dean was sanding a loose railing. Maple napped nearby. Pastor Harris waved at me as he passed, then handed Dean a thermos. People had accepted him, all because a stray dog had refused to let him go hungry. A few weeks later, we got the letter. From the county. It said Maple had been evaluated through anonymous observation and determined to be non-aggressive, socially integrated, and eligible for legal adoption if desired. We met again at the bookstore, the usual crew. "She belongs to the town," Sarah said. "But someone's got to sign papers." We all looked at each other. Dean cleared his throat. "I think she picked me a long time ago." No one disagreed. So Dean adopted her officially. Got her a new collar. Red. Tag engraved with her name. She still sleeps in the shed sometimes. Still visits the bakery for her bun. But now she wears a collar, trots beside Dean through the streets like she's been here forever. She still makes trips to the woods now and then. We stopped following. Wherever she goes, we trust she's doing something good. And she always comes back. The way Maple tilted her head when you spoke to her. It was uncanny, like she was actually trying to understand every word. Sometimes I joked that she probably knew more about what was going on in this town than any of us. But lately it didn't feel like much of a joke. It had been 3 months since Dean moved into the patched-up trailer, and by now, Maple had become a fixture. If someone misplaced a wallet or a kid dropped a toy near the square, there was a decent chance Maple had found it and was standing beside it when the owner came back. Once, she followed an elderly man from the church all the way home because he looked unsteady. He didn't even realize she'd stayed by his side until he reached his porch, and she sat down like she was clocking out of a shift. Dean had settled into a rhythm, too. He worked quietly, without asking for anything. Repaired benches, cleared storm drains, helped patch the fence behind the school. Most days he had his sleeves rolled up and a quiet focus on his face. No one told him to do it. He just did. Said it made him feel like he belonged again. I think Maple taught him that. But then came the letter. Not from the county this time, from a construction company out of state. Someone had bought the woods, the very woods Maple had called home, the same patch where her pups had once been hidden, where Dean had made his lean-to, where countless quiet moments had happened beneath the trees. The plan? Clear it for a mini golf course and RV parking. The mayor's office posted a notice on the bulletin board outside Town Hall. Most people didn't notice right away. The legal language made it sound like a routine survey. But Sarah caught it. She rushed into the bookstore with the paper in hand, eyes wide. "They're planning to cut it all down," she said. "All of it." We gathered everyone who had been part of Operation Maple Home. We sat in the back room again. Me, Sarah, Tom, Dean, even Pastor Harris. The news felt heavy, not just because of the trees, but because of what the woods meant. It had been a safe place for Maple, her pups, and for Dean when the world had closed in on him. "They're saying the old trailer and anything else on the lot will be removed by next month," Sarah read aloud. "Site prep starts in 2 weeks. Tom rubbed his jaw. "It's private property. If someone sold it, I'm not sure what we can do." Dean sat back. He didn't say much. But Maple, lying at his feet, let out a small noise. Barely a whine, but sharp enough that we all looked at her. I said, "We need to see if we can delay it. Find out who the buyer is. Maybe talk to them." Tom nodded. "There's always a paper trail." The next few days were a flurry. I contacted the town clerk, who provided the sale documents. Sarah looked up the parent company, which turned out to be a regional real estate developer based in Tennessee. Their website boasted family-friendly attractions and commercial expansions. Not evil, necessarily, but not personal either. They didn't know what they were tearing down. We drafted a letter. Dean wrote most of it. He had a way with words when he got going. The letter described what the woods had meant, not just the trees, but the sanctuary it had provided. For Maple, for her pups, for Dean. We attached photos, the trail cam footage, even screenshots of Maple sleeping beside the lean-to. Then we started a petition. This time, it wasn't just a clipboard passed around church. We went digital. Sarah's nephew built a simple site. It had Maple's picture, Dean's story, and a spot for signatures. It spread fast. People from town shared it. Then people from neighboring towns. Animal rescue groups picked it up. Then a few small news sites. And one morning, I woke up to a message in my inbox. "Hi, I'm Julie from Heartland Pets Weekly. We'd love to do a story about Maple. Do you have time for a quick call?" I called Julie. She was kind, careful with her questions. We talked for an hour. 2 days later, the article went live. "Stray dog saves man. Now town rallies to save her woods." It hit something. Thousands of shares, more signatures, letters from strangers. One family from Ohio sent a picture of their dog with a sign that read, "Maple Matters." Dean was stunned. Maple, of course, just wagged her tail and waited for her daily bun. 2 weeks passed. Then the letter came. The construction company had noticed the attention. Their public relations team offered a statement saying they'd pause work for 30 days to assess community input and environmental impact. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It gave us time. Tom organized a walkthrough of the woods with a local conservationist. They identified rare plant species, nesting birds, and evidence of a natural spring. Dean and I documented every detail. Sarah took photos. Kids from the school wrote letters and drew pictures of Maple standing guard in the forest. And then, one Friday evening, we held a town meeting. Not in the hall, outside, under the big oak in the square. Lanterns hung from the branches, A microphone borrowed from the church. Everyone came, even people who hadn't signed the petition. They brought chairs, blankets, dogs. Maple sat at the front, beside Dean, calm and steady. We spoke, one by one. Tom shared facts about the ecosystem. Sarah talked about what it meant to have something sacred in a town slowly changing. Dean didn't read from a page. He just looked out at the people and said, "I wouldn't be alive without that woods. And she wouldn't have had a place to raise her family. We can't stop change, but maybe we can ask that it respects what was here before." He sat down. Maple rested her head on his foot. The crowd was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then everyone. The mayor stood last. He wasn't known for bold moves, but that night, he stepped to the mic and said, "Let's see what we can do." He promised to draft a proposal for the state to designate the woods as a temporary protected space. Said he'd work with legal to explore alternatives with the developer. A lot still depended on that company, but something had changed. The next week, a local reporter brought a cameraman to film a follow-up. They interviewed Dean, Sarah, and even Pastor Harris. Maple behaved like she'd done press junkets her whole life. She sat calmly, tail wagging, looking at each speaker like she was waiting for her cue. Then came the envelope, unmarked, slipped under the bakery's front door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Saw the article. Didn't know what we were clearing. I used to have a dog like that. Donating 10 acres back to the town? Use it well." No name, no signature. Just a hand-drawn map showing the woods, and a section circled in red. 10 acres. Right where Maple had raised her pups. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to protect the heart of the woods, enough to let Dean keep his trailer, enough to give Maple her trees. The mayor made the announcement at church the next Sunday. People cried. Sarah hugged Dean. The kids made a wooden sign and nailed it to the oak at the entrance of the path. Maple's Woods. She still goes there, even now. Dean lets her roam in the mornings. She visits the creek, sniffs the trees, walks the same path she once took with bread in her mouth and puppies waiting in the dark. And when she's done, she comes back. Tail wagging, eyes bright, still on a mission, still not done. Maple had always been more than a dog to us. At first, she was just a blur of fur stealing bread. But now, several months into her life as a town fixture, she had somehow become something more. Our compass, our rallying point, even our quiet reminder of what mattered. And yet, even after the woods had been partially saved and her name posted on a hand-carved sign nailed to a tree, Maple still carried herself like she had something left to do. It was October by then. The kind of crisp, jacket-required weather that made the sidewalks smell like falling leaves and the windows of the bakery fog up with cinnamon rolls and rising dough. Dean and I had taken to meeting at sunrise most mornings, me with a thermos of coffee, him with whatever tool he planned to use that day. Maple was always a step ahead of both of us. That particular morning, I noticed something odd. Maple didn't sit beside the shed or wander toward the bakery like usual. Instead, she took off in the opposite direction, toward the far edge of the woods near the abandoned train tracks. It was a path she rarely used, and when she did, it was usually late in the afternoon, never first thing in the morning. Dean noticed, too. He called out, not loudly, but enough to catch her attention. She paused, gave one look over her shoulder, then kept going. "You ever seen her go that way this early?" I asked. Dean shook his head. "Nope, but I think she wants us to follow." We did. The leaves crunched under our boots as we cut across Maple's Woods. Every now and then we'd catch a glimpse of her tail flicking ahead, disappearing behind the thicker trees. Dean limped a bit, his bad knee acting up in the colder weather. But he didn't complain. At the far end of the woods, the old tracks ran along a shallow ravine. The bridge over the creek had collapsed years ago, and most folks avoided the area because the footing was bad and the brush was thick. Maple stood at the edge, head low, staring into the ravine. Then we saw it. A blue tarp, half buried under fallen branches. From where we stood, we could barely make out the shape beneath it, but something about the stillness made my stomach tighten. Dean and I slid carefully down the slope, grabbing branches and roots to keep from tumbling. Maple stayed above, watching. When we got closer, we saw the truth. It was a man. Middle-aged, rough beard, skin pale from the cold. He was breathing, but barely. His clothes were soaked, one boot missing. His right leg looked twisted, maybe broken. And next to him, crumpled like a leaf, was a backpack. Dean checked for a pulse. "Still here, but we've got to move fast." I ran back up the slope and called Tom. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd bring the EMTs and be there in 10 minutes. When I got back down, Dean had wrapped the man in his coat and was muttering gently to keep him awake. The man stirred once, coughed, and whispered something we couldn't quite catch. Tom arrived with the EMTs not long after. They moved fast, careful. The man was lifted onto a stretcher and taken to the hospital. We rode behind in Dean's truck. At the ER, we waited. 2 hours passed. Then a nurse came out and told us the man's name was Lewis. He'd been hiking alone for weeks, living rough, no contact with family. The fall had broken his leg and knocked him unconscious. If Maple hadn't found him, he might not have made it through another night. Dean and I exchanged a look. We didn't need to say anything. Maple had saved someone again. Back in Watson Creek, word spread fast. By the next morning, the bakery chalkboard read, "Maple saves a man again," with a little doodle of her wagging tail. People brought her treats, more than we could responsibly give her. Kids tried to pet her on the street. Tourists even showed up just to catch a glimpse of her. One woman from Illinois brought her 3 kids and asked if Maple would pose for a photo. Maple didn't mind the attention, but we made sure she still had quiet mornings. Dean handled the fame better than expected. He joked about it, said he felt like Maple's security detail. But I could see the pride behind his grin. Maple had found him at his lowest, and now he was watching her shine. Lewis, meanwhile, made a slow recovery. We visited him every other day. At first he was shy, grateful, but guarded. Said he hadn't talked to folks in months. But Maple would sit at the foot of his hospital bed, tail thumping. And little by little, he opened up. He'd been a teacher once. Math. Loved numbers, hated meetings. Lost his job during a round of budget cuts, then lost his apartment not long after. A friend offered him a ride west, but the friend bailed halfway through. So Lewis had walked. Camped. Hoped something would change. Maple had changed it. When he was well enough to leave the hospital, Dean offered him a cot in the trailer until he found something more permanent. Lewis hesitated, then said yes. So now there were 2 men in the trailer, and 1 dog who somehow seemed to be in charge. That winter, Watson Creek had its first heavy snowfall in years. Everything turned white and silent. The bakery kept its ovens running, and I added a small hot cocoa station to the bookstore. Sarah started a coat drive. Tom helped organize firewood delivery for older residents. Maple, for her part, kept her routines. She walked the woods even with snow up to her belly. She sniffed every corner of town, sometimes disappearing for hours before reappearing like it was nothing. She brought back strange items. A mitten, a dog leash with no clip, once even a dented thermos. She'd drop them at Dean's feet, then sit expectantly, as if to say, "Make something of this." Dean and Lewis turned the shed into something new, added a little awning, painted the walls, hung up shelves, and installed a battery-powered light. Sarah called it Maple's Workshop. Kids dropped off broken toys, and Dean and Lewis fixed them up. Maple supervised, of course. Spring brought new changes: flowers, tourists, a new coffee truck. But the biggest change came in the form of a letter from a woman named Catherine. It was addressed to Maple. Sarah handed it to me, eyebrows raised. Inside was a note, handwritten on delicate stationery. Dear Maple, I saw your story in a magazine at the airport. I'm 10 years old. I love dogs more than anything. I wanted to help, so I started collecting spare change in a jar called For Maple's Friends. My classmates joined in. We raised $382. I hope this helps another dog like you. Love, Catherine. I showed it to Dean. He teared up. We decided the money would go toward creating an emergency vet fund at the local clinic, just in case another animal came through town needing help. We wrote back to Catherine. Well, technically, Maple did. We included a paw print and a photo. 2 weeks later, her school sent 50 letters, each addressed to Maple, each with crayon drawings and tiny stories. Dean read everyone aloud in the workshop. Lewis filed them in a binder labeled Maple Mail. She listened quietly, tail thumping now and then. It was clear she understood that she was loved. But one night, something strange happened. Maple didn't come home. She'd been out for her evening walk through the woods. Dean had seen her trot off, like always. But by midnight, there was no sign. The next morning, still nothing. We searched. Dean, Lewis, Tom, even a few of the teenagers from the high school. We covered the woods, the tracks, the ravine. No sign. I don't remember the last time I felt such a heavy quiet in Watson Creek. Maple had always returned. Always. Until now. The second night without Maple felt wrong. The shed sat cold and empty, the blanket she normally curled up on left untouched. Dean had kept the porch light on, just in case she came back. Lewis brewed coffee at 3 a.m. and sat at the window with a pair of binoculars like he might spot her walking out of the woods. I didn't sleep much either. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined her hurt, lost, or worse. By sunrise, the whole town knew she was missing. Pastor Harris announced it at the early service. Sarah updated the chalkboard out front. Maple's missing. If you see her, call Dean or Tom. Tom made a map and printed out flyers. We all agreed to search again, this time in pairs, more organized, combing every possible path. The woods were quiet when Dean and I stepped in with our flashlights. It had rained a little overnight, and the dirt was soft enough to catch prints. We found a few early on, paw prints, definitely Maple's, heading east, toward the old service road that hadn't been used in decades. We followed the trail until it veered off into a narrow section that led to an old barn. I hadn't seen the place in years. Most folks forgot it was there, half sunk into the ground and nearly hidden by tall grass. But when we got closer, we both stopped. There was a faint scratching sound coming from inside. Dean called out her name. No answer. Just the soft shuffle of movement. He reached for the rusted latch and eased the door open. The hinges groaned, the smell of old hay and dust, rolling out like a wave. There she was. Maple. Curled up beside a large box, her tail wagging weakly, ears twitching when she heard our voices. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't hurt. But she looked tired. Bone tired. Her eyes flicked toward the box. Dean stepped inside and knelt slowly. "What's this, girl? What did you find?" Inside the box, Nestled in a nest of fabric and newspapers were 4 kittens, tiny, squeaking, their eyes barely open. Maple licked the smallest one and looked back at us. Dean exhaled. "Of course, you found another family." Lewis showed up 20 minutes later, along with Tom and 2 high schoolers who'd been helping with the search. We all stood there, baffled but amazed. Maple had gone missing not because she was lost, but because she'd found someone else who needed her. Tom knelt beside the box. "No sign of the mother cat?" "None," I said. "Maple must have heard them, or smelled them. Maybe the mother got spooked." Dean looked around the barn. "It's too cold in here. We can't leave them." So we carried the box gently back to the shed. Maple walked beside it the whole way. Once inside, Sarah brought blankets. I picked up kitten formula and bottles from the pet store. And just like that, Maple's mission had expanded again. She watched over those kittens like she'd birthed them herself. The town responded the way it always did, with warmth, food, and open arms. Maple's fan mail doubled. A nearby vet volunteered free checkups for the kittens. A reporter from a bigger paper in the city called to schedule a feature. Maple didn't care about any of that. She just made sure the kittens were warm. She didn't leave the shed much for the next few weeks. Only when Dean walked her, or when the bakery buns were too tempting to ignore. She'd take her treat, then return right to her new charges. Each kitten had a different pattern. One all black, one gray with white paws, one orange stripe, and one that looked like a puff of ash. We gave them placeholder names: Toast, Muffin, Biscuit, and Crumb. People came by just to peek in the window. Kids waved drawings of kittens. One girl made a sign that read, "Welcome to Maple's Daycare." Dean and Lewis built a wooden frame to support the box and added a gentle heating pad under the blanket. Tom wired in a motion light so they could see better at night. The kittens began to grow. And as they did, Maple taught them things. We watched her nudge them toward the litter box. Help them climb the edge of the bedding. Even carry them back when they wandered too far. She didn't try to mother them like a cat might, but she seemed to know just what they needed. One morning, I caught her sitting at the doorway of the shed, watching them tussle. She looked proud, peaceful. But there was something else in her expression, too, like she was already preparing to let them go. A month passed. Then 2. The kittens grew fast. Toast, the boldest, started sneaking out of the shed to explore the yard. Crumb, the smallest, preferred to nap on Maple's tail. Muffin and Biscuit were inseparable. Always in motion, always curious. The local shelter helped us find homes. We were careful. Very careful. No random adoptions. Each potential family came to visit, sat in the shed, met Maple and the kittens. If Maple didn't approve, we didn't proceed. She had a way of knowing. One couple came from 3 towns over. They brought toys and soft voices. Maple sat between them and didn't move when Toast crawled into their lap. They were approved on the spot. Eventually, all 4 found homes. The shed felt quiet for a while after that. Maple slept longer, walked slower, but she never seemed sad. Just satisfied, like a job well done. Then came the vet visit. Routine checkup, or so we thought. Dean had noticed a limp, barely visible, but there, and Maple's appetite had dipped. Not drastically, but enough for concern. The vet ran tests, checked her joints, listened to her heart, Then she frowned. There was something off in her blood work. More tests. More waiting. Dean didn't talk much during those days. Neither did Lewis. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the vet called. Maple had a condition. Chronic, but manageable. Not terminal, not immediately life-threatening, but something that would require care, regular medication, and dietary adjustments. Dean asked the questions, took notes, nodded through the call. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "She's not going anywhere. Not yet." We adjusted. A little less salt in her treats. Special food. Regular walks, but no steep hills. A soft cushion in the shed, one in the trailer, and one behind the bookstore. She visited all three like a queen making her rounds. And then, without warning, she disappeared again. Not for days this time, just for a morning. She came back carrying something in her mouth. A newspaper. Not chewed, not torn. Folded. Intact. Dean unrolled it. It was from the city. On the front page, a photo of a dog next to a firehouse. Headline: Fire Department adopts stray who saved baby from blaze. Dean looked at Maple. She stared back. He smiled. "Yeah, girl, I get it. There's always another one." And we knew she wasn't done. Maple was many things. Savior, mother, guide. But most of all, she was a finder of lost things, of broken hearts, of places where hope had started to flicker. And she always found a way to bring it back. A few days after Maple dropped off the newspaper, Dean and I sat on the bench outside the bakery watching her nap in the sun. She lay with her head resting on one paw, her ears twitching with every passing footstep or distant bird call. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched her breathe. Slow, steady, that quiet rhythm that had somehow become the heartbeat of Watson Creek. Then Dean said, "You think she wants to go there?" I knew what he meant. The firehouse, the one from the article. He'd read the story 3 times. A stray dog in the city found a crying baby inside a burning building and led firefighters to the room. The fire crew adopted her on the spot, gave her a name, a bed, even a badge. Maple had brought us that paper like it was a message, like she was thinking about what came next. But I shook my head. She's not going anywhere. Not unless she wants to. Dean looked down at his hands. She always wants to. That's the thing. It's never about where she stays. It's about who needs her next. That same afternoon, Sarah's nephew Brian arrived in town. 26, freelance photographer, bouncing between coasts. He'd never met Maple before, but he knew about her. Everyone who stepped foot in the bakery did. He came to visit family, but within a day he had his camera out, trailing Maple with a lens the length of a baseball bat. She didn't mind him, not like other newcomers. She let him follow her through the park, to the shed, even to the woods. He moved gently, never pushed. Took photos like he was sketching her soul, not stealing it. On the 3rd day, Brian showed me a batch of prints. One was Maple silhouetted against the sunrise by the old fence. Another had her sitting under the hand-painted Maple's Woods sign, with a leaf stuck to her fur. One caught her mid-run, tail like a flag behind her. "I want to put together a photo story," Brian said. "But not just for a gallery. I think we could turn it into something bigger." "Like what?" "A book. Maybe even a traveling show. Pictures, captions, maybe some stories. We could donate part of the proceeds to shelters. Maple could be the face of it." It sounded ambitious, but not impossible. We met with Dean and Lewis at the shed to talk it through. Dean scratched his chin, staring at the photos laid out on a table. "She's done so much. If this helps other animals get homes, I say we try. Lewis grinned. "I'll handle logistics. I've got time." That week, they started working on it. Sarah collected stories from townspeople. Tom scanned in the town archives. Kids drew illustrations. The town rallied around the idea like it was a new festival. We called it Finding Maple, a story about a stray dog told through the eyes of a town that had learned to follow her lead. We included everything, from the first loaf of bread stolen, to the pups in the hollow tree, to Lewis and the kittens and the firehouse newspaper. Every act, every moment, captured in image and word. Brian worked non-stop. Sometimes we'd find him asleep at the back of the bookstore with photos spread across the table. He built a website, created a mailing list, even secured a small grant for printing. The town's energy swirled around Maple, but she remained Maple. Calm, quiet, focused. She still did her walks, still paused by the bakery, still curled up in the shed at night. But she seemed to know something was happening. Every time someone leaned down to thank her, she blinked slowly, like she already understood. One morning, while I restocked the shelves at the bookstore, I looked out the window and saw Maple sitting outside, alone. No bun, no leash, no one near her, just sitting, perfectly still, staring at the hardware store. I stepped out and approached slowly. "Hey girl, what are you watching?" She didn't turn her head, just flicked an ear. I followed her gaze. An older man was standing just inside the hardware store doorway. He was hunched, wearing a patched coat, one hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. His other hand clutched a paper bag, trembling slightly. Maple took a step forward, then another. The man blinked, then slowly crouched down. Maple walked right to him and pressed her head gently into his chest. I caught up and realized he was crying. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her. "I thought I was invisible." Later, we learned his name was Clarence. He'd been a long-time resident who left town over a decade ago after a bad divorce and a downward spiral. He'd returned recently, too ashamed to ask for help, sleeping in his truck and eating what he could afford. But Maple had seen him. Sarah made him lunch that day. Dean invited him to the shed. Lewis offered to help find him work. Clarence now helps Dean in the workshop. Quiet, steady, always with a clean flannel and a thermos. He still doesn't say much, but he scratches Maple behind the ears every time he sees her. And she sits next to him like she did from the first moment. That week, Finding Maple launched online. Brian posted a handful of photos and the first story, Maple and the Bread. It hit 200 shares within a day. Then 2,000. A rescue group in Oregon messaged to ask permission to post the series. Then a school in Vermont asked for permission to print pages for a reading lesson. The messages poured in. "Your story made me cry in the best way. We just adopted our own Maple. My son wants to grow up to be a dog helper like Dean." The town couldn't believe it. Maple was everywhere, but she didn't change. Still quiet. Still watching. One night, during the first real thunderstorm of spring, the power flickered out. The shed went dark. Dean and Lewis lit a lantern and played cards by the soft glow. I visited after closing up the bookstore. We sat in a triangle, the rain tapping against the roof. Maple paced for a while, uneasy. Then, just before the thunder rolled again, she sat bolt upright, ears high. Dean noticed. "You hear something, girl?" She barked once, sharp, focused. Then she took off. Dean and I grabbed jackets and flashlights, Lewis behind us. She led us north, Past Maple's woods, through the new trails the kids had carved, across the narrow creek that now ran full with spring rain. She paused at the edge of a clearing and barked again. A faint cry answered. We found the tent in the dark, half collapsed, soaked through, barely visible in the downpour. Inside was a woman in her 30s, shielding 2 kids beneath a tattered blanket. She looked up as we approached, startled but too exhausted to speak. Maple entered the tent and laid down beside them. The kids reached for her instantly. We brought them into town that night. Sarah opened the bakery kitchen and brewed cocoa. Pastor Harris offered a spare room at the church. Tom and Lewis gathered dry clothes. Their story was hard. Left an abusive situation. No family. No shelter willing to take them all in. They had landed in Watson Creek because the train station had been their last stop. They had planned to leave the next morning, but Maple found them first, and the town made sure they stayed. The woman's name was Beth. Her children were Luke and David. Within a week, Luke was enrolled in school. David started attending Sunday craft time. Beth began working mornings at the bakery. She cried the first time she saw her boys laugh. Maple, of course, just returned to her usual bench outside. Everywhere she went, someone waved. Someone smiled. Someone leaned down and said, "Thank you." Dean kept saying it too, even when no one else was around. Sometimes just a whisper, as Maple curled up beside him on the porch. Thank you, because she always found the ones who needed help. And somehow, she always brought them home. By the time the lilacs bloomed along Main Street, Watson Creek had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The mayor liked to say we'd been a quiet town with a loud dog, but we all knew Maple wasn't loud in the usual sense. She didn't bark for the sake of it. She didn't chase cars or howl at the moon. She led people without ever saying a word, nudged open doors with her paws, and carried hope in her mouth like a bundle of twigs meant for building something new. The morning after Maple found Beth and her boys, the bakery ran out of flour. Sarah joked it was because kindness made people hungrier. But it wasn't just food they came for. They wanted to see Maple. Kids leaned against the windows, hoping for a glimpse. One boy dropped a peanut butter cookie on the step and whispered, "For the hero." Maple didn't eat it. She nudged it back toward him, tail flicking like she knew his mom wouldn't approve. Beth started bringing Luke and David to the bookstore on Tuesdays. They sat cross-legged in the children's section, flipping through dog-themed picture books, their laughter mixing with the creak of turning pages. Maple sometimes padded in, curled up near the window, and listened like she was proofreading. Dean built a small wooden bench just outside the shop, painted it seafoam green. On the side, he carved 3 words. Maple sat here. Tourists took photos with it. Locals started using it for their morning coffee. It became a new landmark, not flashy, not scripted, just meaningful. Brian returned with more prints. He'd been traveling for a few weeks, showcasing Finding Maple at small festivals and libraries. He brought back stories, people who'd adopted, people who started shelters, one couple who said Maple's story had convinced them not to give up on each other. He showed us an article from a mid-sized paper in Michigan titled, "The Dog Who Built a Town." He said, "I think we need to start thinking bigger." No one disagreed. So we planned an event. Not a festival, not exactly. Something quieter. Something Maple would approve of. We called it Day of Finding. A day for adoption. For story sharing. For helping people and pets who'd gotten lost one way or another. We set the date for late May, gave ourselves 4 weeks to prepare, and made one rule. It wasn't allowed to be fancy. No fireworks, no big-ticket booths, just connection. The town came alive. Sarah's bakery agreed to bake 100 tiny maple-shaped cookies, proceeds to go to a new emergency vet fund. Tom called every shelter within a 100-mile radius and coordinated transport. Pastor Harris offered the church lawn for a quiet evening candlelight ceremony. Dean and Lewis crafted wooden signs and memory boxes. The school art class designed flyers with watercolors of maple. Even Clarence painted a welcome sign in bold red script. Welcome home. The only person who didn't fuss over the plans was Maple. She kept her same routine. Morning walks, bakery stop, shed naps, evening patrol through the woods. Until the Tuesday before the event, when she showed up on the porch of the trailer with something stuck in her fur, a strip of blue cloth frayed on one end. She dropped it at Dean's feet and stared at him until he picked it up. He turned it over, confused. "Looks like part of a shirt." Maple nudged his hand and looked toward the woods. Dean didn't hesitate. He called Tom, Lewis, and me. Within an hour, we were walking the trail behind Maple, deeper than we'd ever followed her. Past the hollow tree, past the old ravine, through a narrow path hidden by overgrowth. That's where we found the sign, a wooden plank nailed to a tree, carved with the word "Stop." Below it, a milk crate filled with empty food cans and a torn pair of boots, and about 20 yards beyond, a canvas tarp draped over sticks. Smoke curled from a tiny campfire beside it. Someone was there. Maple stopped at the edge and lay down, head resting on her paws. We waited. Then the tarp shifted. A boy stepped out. Couldn't have been more than 15. Dirt on his cheeks. Arms too thin. He saw us and froze. Tom raised a hand. "We're not here to hurt you." The boy didn't run, but his eyes darted between us and Maple. "She brought us," I said gently. "She does that sometimes. Finds people who need something." He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "I'm okay. You hungry?" Dean asked. He nodded slowly. We didn't crowd him. We left a paper bag near the crate. Sandwiches, juice, a few fruit bars. Then backed away. Maple stayed where she was. The boy returned to the tarp and peeked inside the bag. He took one sandwich and a juice, then sat by the fire, watching us. We waited an hour. Then we left. That night, Dean sat outside, staring at the blue cloth. How many more has she found that we never even knew about? The next day, the tarp was gone. In its place was a folded note. Maple stood beside it, tail thumping once. Tom picked it up and read it aloud. "Thank you. I'm going to try again. She said I should." No name, just that. We never saw the boy again. But we watched Maple a little closer. Every time she paused at a corner or stared into a window, we wondered who she was looking for. The day of finding arrived with golden skies and gentle breeze. The town square filled with booths, simple ones. One for pet adoption, one for community resources, one for storytelling. Maple sat near the green bench most of the morning, accepting soft pets and whispered thanks. That afternoon, Clarence read aloud from the binder Lewis kept, a collection of letters and stories written to Maple over the past year. Kids sat cross-legged, adults leaned on fences. Everyone listened. As the sun dipped low, candles were handed out. We gathered on the church lawn. No speeches, just music, Acoustic guitar, quiet humming, the occasional sniffle. Each candle lit represented someone found. By Maple. By this town. By a moment of kindness. I looked around and saw Dean with his arm resting on Lewis's shoulder. Beth had one hand on Luke's back and the other wrapped around David. Pastor Harris stood near Sarah, both of them smiling with tear-bright eyes. Maple walked between the rows, brushing ankles and warming feet. She didn't need to speak. She never had. She just reminded us that sometimes all it takes to save someone is to notice they're there, to see them. And Maple saw us all, one by one, then brought us home. Maple's final summer began the same way her first one had, with a loaf of bread. This time it wasn't stolen. Sarah had wrapped it in brown paper and placed it on the green bench beside a card that simply read, "For our girl." She hadn't told anyone she was doing it. She didn't need to. Everyone in town already understood the rhythm of these gestures, these small, quiet ways of saying more than words ever could. By then, Maple had grown slower. Her steps were deliberate, not sluggish, but measured. She still made her rounds, though with less urgency, stopping longer beneath the shady trees by the creek, pausing to let toddlers toddle up to her with cautious hands and cookie crumbs. She still sat at the edge of the bakery in the morning, waiting for her bun. Still napped in the shed every afternoon. Still walked beside Dean and Lewis in the evenings, her pace just behind theirs like she was watching over their backs. The town was blooming around her. Flowers in the window boxes, new cobblestones laid in front of the hardware store, freshly painted murals on the school fence. One mural had Maple in the center, surrounded by children, animals, even tiny painted stars. Above her, in big curling script, were the words, "She found us." Dean took her to the vet more frequently now, not out of panic, but care. The vet was gentle, always greeting her with a rub behind the ears before checking her vitals. The medication helped her joints, but time, as it always does, carried its own momentum. We all noticed the changes. Maple no longer chased the breeze when it passed. She lay down more often, sometimes in places she never had before, the foot of the bookstore steps, the cool tile inside the church foyer, even the small garden behind the trailer where Lewis had planted wildflowers. We tried not to talk about it too much, but there was a quiet understanding among us. This chapter, like all chapters, was headed toward its final paragraph. And Maple knew it too. That's why, when she stood in the town square one morning and barked twice, once loud, once sharp, we all stopped. She hadn't barked like that in months. She stood at the fountain, looking around, waiting. Dean was the first to move. He knelt beside her. "Where to, girl?" She looked north. The woods. Maple took the path slowly, and we followed. Dean, Sarah, Tom, Lewis, Beth with Luke and David, even Pastor Harris. A line of people trailing behind a dog who had never led us wrong. She stopped once to sniff the hollow tree, then again to nudge a forgotten toy someone had left by the creek. She paused at every place that had once held a piece of her story. Then she led us to the old picnic bench. It was still there, a little warped from age, but solid. Maple climbed onto it, sat, then lay down with her head up, watching all of us gather. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a goodbye bark or a collapsing body. She just lay there, breathing slow, eyes open, scanning the faces around her. One by one, we sat too. Tom handed out thermoses of coffee. Sarah passed a cloth bag with bakery rolls. The kids played quietly at the edge of the clearing. Dean didn't say anything. He just sat beside her and placed one hand gently on her back. The sun filtered through the leaves above. A breeze tugged lightly at our clothes. And there was a stillness, not heavy or sad, but sacred, like a held breath between two heartbeats. After about an hour, Maple stood. She stepped down from the bench, walked to Dean, and pressed her head to his chest. Then to Lewis. Then to Sarah. Then, one by one, to everyone there. It felt like a thank you. Then she turned and walked into the woods. We waited. She didn't return that night. We searched gently, not with worry, but with care, the way you search for something you know must be left where it is. The next morning, Tom found her. She had curled up beneath the old train bridge, the place where she once found Lewis, her head resting on a flattened patch of moss. Her eyes were closed, her fur still warm, her body at peace. Tom knelt, placed his hand over her heart, and waited. Then called Dean. No sirens, no shouting, just soft words, gentle hands. We brought her back not in a truck or cart, but in a blanket held by 4 people who had loved her. She was laid in the garden behind the bookstore, beside the wildflowers, under the tree where the wind always seemed to whisper. The town planted a circle of lavender around her. Beth painted a stone for her grave. It read, "Maple, she found us all." For days, people came. Left notes, photos, drawings, even small tokens. A bread crust, a kitten figurine, a firefighter badge keychain. The green bench was repainted. The mural at the school was updated, now with a glowing aura around Maple and a banner above that said, "Now we find each other." Dean started a non-profit with Lewis, the Maple Project. Its mission was simple: identify those in town who were overlooked, get them help, food, shelter, companionship, even if all they needed was someone to talk to. They operated from the shed. Sarah still sets a bun outside every morning. Sometimes a stray dog stops by, sometimes not. But every once in a while, the bun disappears without a sound, and we find a paw print in the dirt, or a child reunited with their parent, or a lost wallet returned to the bakery counter. No one says much about those moments, but we all look toward the woods and smile, because some legacies don't need statues or parades. They live in footsteps left behind, in benches painted seafoam green, in quiet acts of being seen. And Maple, our girl, will always be here, finding us still.